Parents who are narcissists are nothing like the stereotypical loving and supportive parents we tend to think of as good parents. In fact, narcissistic parents are the opposite of that. In particular, a narcissistic father is selfish, demanding, and harshly critical of his children. He can bully his sons and ignore his daughters. He only cares about his own needs and is often abusive. That's why you need to set firm boundaries with a narcissistic father. But how do you do that? Dealing with narcissistic parents is a special passion of mine, and I know that I can help you set clear boundaries to protect yourself from emotional and physical abuse. It's important because a narcissistic father can do lifelong damage to his children. That's why you need to understand how he will treat you, why he's that way, and if he will ever hurt you physically. Knowing that helps you to set and enforce strong boundaries. Number 1, make your boundaries clear. When you're setting your boundaries with your narcissistic father, you need to be very clear and very firm. Anything that is unclear is something your narcissistic father can use to his advantage. To be very clear with your father, it's important that you consider carefully what your limits will be. Setting boundaries is really more about respecting yourself. With consistency, you can get your narcissistic father to change his behavior, but make no mistake about it, he hasn't changed. You will need to enforce violations every time they occur, and you will need to be ever vigilant for those violations. If you let one instance of a violation slide, your narcissistic father will see that as an invitation to continue to violate your limits whenever he wants. He will know that he can sometimes get away with pushing your limits. It will then be that much harder for you to get him to behave in a way that you find acceptable. Number 2, provide a written document with details. In order to be crystal clear with your narcissistic father about your boundaries, it helps to give him a written document with specific details about what you will and will not accept and what the consequences will be if he violates your limits. You'll have to determine for yourself exactly what those limits are and what you will do in response to violations of those limits. Take your time in determining what you consider to be important. Once you know, make a list and give a hard copy and a digital copy to your narcissistic father. Date the documents so that you can refer to that when you informed your father of the consequences for violations. You should also expect that he will push the limits no matter what you do, but as long as you stay consistent in enforcing the consequences, he will eventually modify his behavior. Be patient because it will take time, as I found out with my narcissistic mother. But as long as you're consistent in the enforcement of violations, he will likely modify his behavior. My mother did, and we can now have a relationship, where before that didn't seem possible. Number 3, don't tolerate physical abuse. Whether you're a minor or an adult, you should never have to tolerate physical abuse. If your father is physically abusive, tell someone about it. If you have told your mother and she still hasn't done anything, tell someone outside the family. You can go to a school counselor or even the police. This will have life-changing consequences, but those will be better than being subjected to physical abuse. Physical abuse is never an acceptable response to a situation. If your narcissistic father is physically abusive to you, he is likely also physically abusive to your siblings and your mother. Getting that stopped will help everyone involved. Don't get me wrong, emotional abuse isn't acceptable either. That's more difficult to expose. And while some places are instituting laws against emotional abuse, the practice is not yet widespread, in part because it's difficult to define. There are things you can do to derail emotional abuse, and setting your boundaries is a good first step in that process. Number 4, don't justify yourself. When you're setting your boundaries with a narcissistic father, you don't have to justify why you're setting particular boundaries. In fact, by trying to justify them to your father, you appear as though you're not sure yourself about whether they are appropriate or not. That's how your narcissistic father will see any attempt to justify yourself. Simply state what your boundaries are and what the consequences for violations will be. As noted previously, don't negotiate them or explain why you've chosen them. Just give your father a list of behaviors you won't accept and what you will do if he engages in those behaviors. Remember, setting boundaries is your way of respecting yourself, and you don't have to justify or explain that. Keeping it simple and straightforward is the best way to get your message across to your father. It leaves very little room for misinterpretation. Having said that, you can expect that your narcissistic father will misinterpret your boundaries, but you will respond by initiating the consequences you've laid out. If he continues to press the matter, you may have to opt to go no contact until he's willing to comply. Number 5. Practice good self-care. This is going to be a difficult process. It doesn't matter if you know your father is a bad father. It will still be difficult. Anytime you have to confront someone who has played such a significant role in your life, it's difficult to do. That's why you need to practice good self-care throughout this process. Make sure you're doing things that make you feel good. Take a walk in nature or get some exercise. Meditate or talk with a loving friend. Whatever constitutes self-care for you, be sure to engage in that regularly to support yourself throughout the process. Your father was not a good father, and likely your mother was codependent in that behavior as well. Now is your chance to be a good parent to yourself. You can be the parent to your inner child that you should have had growing up. Be kind to yourself, be accepting, and unconditionally love yourself. There will be a lot of emotions that surface as you start this healing journey, so take the appropriate amount of time to care for yourself as you process those. You are your own hero now, and taking good care of yourself is another important element of setting boundaries. Number 6. Don't expect an apology. If you have visions of an emotional Hallmark movie where everyone realizes the mistakes they made and comes together in the end, you will be disappointed. For your narcissistic father to take responsibility for his actions and apologize, it would take years of intense therapy. Narcissists simply can't tolerate admitting that they made errors. If they do apologize, it's because doing so benefits them in some way. Your narcissistic father is not going to apologize for his behavior. He will justify it, blame you for it, and try to gaslight you into believing it never happened. But he won't take responsibility and apologize. You have to accept that and proceed anyway. You have to become the parent to yourself that he should have been. Moreover, you can't go back and make things right. The damage he did to you has already been done. The only thing you can do now is to move on and help yourself heal from the abuse you suffered. And number 7, get therapy for yourself. One way to really help yourself through the process of setting boundaries and healing from the damage inflicted by your narcissistic father is to get therapy for yourself. Your father created emotional wounds, and perhaps physical ones as well, and you need to heal those to be able to move on. A professional therapist can guide you through the process of discovering those wounds, exploring what's at the root of the pain, and healing from that trauma. They can often give you objective insights that can help you move through the process with greater success. There is no stigma associated with getting therapy for the trauma you suffered from an abusive father. In fact, you should be applauded for doing that because it is one of the most difficult things you will ever do in your life. Is it possible to heal without therapy? Yes, but a professional therapist can help support you through this painful process. You deserve that kind of support, and you should have received it from your narcissistic father years ago. But he was not capable of giving it. Now you can find someone who can. In the end, a narcissistic parent can damage you in significant ways that can affect you for the rest of your life. When you start to heal and begin to set boundaries to take good care of yourself, you're likely to encounter numerous emotional triggers and the wounds that created them. It's important to heal these because your narcissistic father can use them to manipulate and control you. I know this can be a difficult thing to do, and that's why I've created a 5-step roadmap to heal emotional triggers. This free guide will give you step-by-step instructions for identifying your emotional triggers, diffusing them, and healing the old wounds that created them. If you would like a copy of this handy guide, simply click on the link below this video and I'll send it directly to your inbox. Thanks for watching.